A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Hey everyone, it's Boogeyman Ben. Hope everyone's doing well and having a nice day. Lo and behold, I'm finally able to do my Hannibal Lecter film series retrospective that I've been talking about for several months now. Just finally found the time because it does take quite a bit of time to go through each of these films, even though there's only 4 that I'm going to be talking about. I know a lot of people like the film Manhunter, which Michael Mann did, which was in essence a adaptation of Thomas Harris's Red Dragon novel, but I've never really cared for that film, so it won't be one of the ones that I discuss. I have seen the film. I saw it in film school. Was not a fan of it. Got a lot of angry looks from my peers in my class for not liking the film. At that time, the sequel to Silence of the Lambs had not come out yet, so the only Hannibal Lecter film I had ever seen was Silence of the Lambs, and what I associated Hannibal Lecter with was Sir Anthony Hopkins' performance. I mean, he was Hannibal to me. I'm a big fan of Michael Mann. I really love Brian Cox, who played Hannibal Lecter in the film Manhunter, but I just couldn't latch onto that film. There was something about the style of it. It had a very Miami Vice look to it because Michael Mann was the one that created Miami Vice. He had directed episodes, and to me, it just, with all the big sunsets and everything, it just didn't feel like it belonged in the Hannibal Lecter universe because Silence of the Lambs had such a gray and dark and gritty tone to it. So I guess the big bright sunsets and everything just didn't work for me. So it just is not a fan. I'm not a fan of that film, and I have watched it again and still feel the exact same way. So people that love it, that's great. It's just not a film that I particularly care about. But what I'm going to do today is go through the 4 Hannibal Lecter films, or 4 films featuring the character that I consider, that I own and that I have seen and enjoy. They are Silence of the Lambs, its sequel Hannibal, the prequel Red Dragon, and another prequel, Hannibal Rising. So I hope everyone enjoys this and stay tuned.
You know what you look like to me with your good bag and your cheap shoes? You look like a rube. A well-scrubbed, hustling rube with a little taste. Good nutrition's giving you some length of bone, but you're not more than one generation from poor white trash, are you, Agent Starling?
Silence of the Lambs would be released on February 14th of 1991. It was directed by Jonathan Demme, and it was written by Thomas Harris and Ted Talley, who would do the screenplay. Thomas Harris wrote the novel. The film starred Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling, Anthony Hopkins as Dr. Hannibal Lecter. You had Scott Glenn as Jack Crawford, Anthony Heald as Dr. Frederick Chilton, Frankie Faison as Barney, and of course the excellent Ted Levine as Buffalo Bill. The plot of Silence of the Lambs focuses on Clarice Starling, who is a young FBI cadet in training at the academy. She is recruited by Jack Crawford to interview the psychiatrist Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter, who is imprisoned, and hopes of getting some leads on a recent string of women abductions and murders, all being orchestrated by a character known as Buffalo Bill. Now, I saw Silence of the Lambs when I was about, I think it came out when I was 16 years old. I didn't see it until it came out on videotape. It was certainly a different film when I first saw it. I was intrigued by the characters in it. It was the first film I had ever seen Anthony Hopkins in. I know he had done other films before that, like The Elephant Man. There was a couple other ones. I think The Bounty was one. But I had just never seen him in anything else. But I was, very intrigued by his character and the performance of Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter. I had seen Jodie Foster in films like The Accused and Stealing Home, but I thought her performance as Clarice was just brilliant, and have always been a fan of it. I still think it's her best performance, even after all of the films that she's done in the last couple decades since this film came out. It's just this film is a very haunting film, and it's a film that I think will there's nothing bad you can say about this film, and I think it will stand the test of time as a true classic. I've always there's just the performances are just so excellent in this film. Foster and Hopkins just together in those scenes, it's so intense, and it's just them talking. But the way that he talks to her, and the way that he kind of insults her and puts her in her place, and you see the hurt on her face when he says these things, because she's so young and vulnerable. But she just sort of sucks it up, and she gives it right back to him. And there's a respect that develops between the two. And I think that's like one of the best parts of the film, is just their interaction between each other. I also really like Scott Glenn in the film as Jack Crawford. I thought he did a great job. Love Ted Levine. I've been a Ted Levine fan since I saw this film, and I know he plays a really kind of creepy, twisted, freaky character, but just always been a fan of the actor. I think he just completely embodied the Buffalo Bill character, and just really gets under your skin when you see him in the film. The fact that he's making this woman, like he's skinning his victims and making a woman's suit out of them, is just completely horrendous and creepy. It's just like it's like it's not a film with a lot of violence or gore. I mean, there are a couple scenes, but for the most part it's all implied. It's talked about in detail, but yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of on-screen violence, except for like maybe the scene in Texas where Hannibal does escape. I think over time this film has just gotten better. I probably would, say it's probably one of my favorite films. And I think it's great that it was a film that received so many awards. Jonathan Demme did a great job directing it. Coming from comedies like Married to the Mob and then doing this, I mean, he really, really did a great job of making a very kind of, it's a timeless film. There's nothing that sort of associates it with that time period that it came out in, the late 80s to early 90s. I think this film, it's got a timeless quality to it, and I think that's great. Again, the performances, I was so happy that Anthony Hopkins won and that Jodie Foster had won. She had already won for The Accused when she won for this, and I think they all deserved the awards they got. And it's kind of amazing that this film, which is, it might be a highbrow horror film to some, but it's a horror film. And I'm so happy that a horror film actually swept the Academy Awards that year. So a rating, I give the film a 10 out of 10 easily. I mean, easily one of the best films ever made, in my opinion. Love all the performances. Just a terrific direction. Excellent screenwriting from Ted Talley. Just a great film. There's nothing bad you can say about it, in my opinion. Love Silence of the Lambs. Still haunting, even over 20 years later.
Is this Clarice? Oh, hello, Clarice.
It would take 10 years for a sequel to Silence of the Lambs come out. I believe it was in the late 90s that Thomas Harris wrote his sequel to the sequel to Silence of the Lambs. The novel Hannibal came out, and I remember there was a huge buzz about that book coming out. At the time, I hadn't read Silence of the Lambs or any of the other Thomas Harris books on the character, like Red Dragon. And I remember there was all this hype, that Anthony Hopkins was going to return as Hannibal Lecter, his famous role. And unfortunately, what happened was, and it's no fault, I think, of anybody. It's just the way things happen. But Jonathan Demme initially was going to return and direct, as was Jodie Foster was going to return to her role as Clarice. The reasonings behind Demme and Foster leaving the project had to do with the novel itself. After Thomas Harris finished writing the novel, he sent copies to the Silence of the Lambs principals, Jonathan Demme, Jodie Foster, Ted Talley, who had written the screenplay, and Anthony Hopkins, for approval. The screenplay was rewritten no less than 15 times because of dissatisfaction by Demme and Foster over new character elements. In the end, neither Demme or Foster remained with the production. I know that Jodie didn't like what happened to the Clarice character in the novel, even though that did not happen in the movie. I have read the book Hannibal, as I've read Silence of the Lambs and the Red Dragon novels as well. But yeah, the ending of Hannibal, the book, is very different from what happens in Hannibal, the movie. The cast of Hannibal, it stars Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. You have Julianne Moore stepping into the role of Clarice Starling. Gary Oldman, the amazing Gary Oldman, as Mason Verger. You have Ray Liotta as Paul Krendler. Frankie Faison returns as Barney. And then, of course, you have Giancarlo Giannini as Inspector Ronaldo Pazzi. In the director's chair, you have the amazing Ridley Scott. The screenplay of the novel was actually written, of course, by Thomas Harris. The screenplay has, there's two credits for the screenplay, David Mamet and Steven Zalian. And then, of course, the beautiful music in this film, which is actually my favorite score out of all 4 Hannibal films, was done by Hans Zimmer. The film was released nearly 10 years to the day that Silence of the Lambs came out. It was released on February 9th of 2001. So there are many different plots going on in Hannibal, and I'll do my best to sort of cover them. The main one has to do with where Clarice Starling is 10 years later in her career as an FBI agent. All the glitz and glamour, the fanfare that she got for catching Buffalo Bill are long gone. She's come under fire from her bosses and the FBI for a botched surveillance of a well-known drug dealer in a shootout at the beginning of the film where an FBI agent is killed. She actually is interviewed by Paul Krendler, who is played to his sleaziest best by Ray Liotta. She is pulled back into the Lecter case with some new information that his first victim, or one of his victims that has survived Hannibal's victims, Mason Verger, who is played by the genius that is Gary Oldman. She goes to interview Verger and gets the information that he has on Hannibal that he said he would only share with her. And during this time, you know, you also see where Hannibal is, and he's actually laying low in Florence, Italy, posing as a Dr. Fell, who's in charge of the Capone Library there. He has an interaction with Inspector Ronaldo Pazzi. Pazzi becomes suspicious of who Dr. Fell really is and begins investigating. And it all leads to an insane kind of climax in Italy, and then brings Hannibal back to the States. Now, I think out of all of the Hannibal Lecter films that I'm covering, this one gets shit on the most, and I don't understand why. I think Hannibal is just as brilliant as Silence of the Lambs, and I always have. In fact, in some ways, Hannibal made me appreciate and love Silence of the Lambs even more. And the reason I have for it is just that I always really enjoyed the character of Hannibal, and I know he's not in Silence of the Lambs very much. I think his scenes add up to about 20 minutes in the film. But he's such a presence, and I wanted to see a film that solely focused on the character, and I got it. I was very disappointed that Jodie Foster did not come back to this movie, or to do this role, and I thought it was an injustice to fans that had been waiting for her to to do the sequel. You know, Anthony Hopkins did it, and I think it was great. I think he was sort of, you know, the one person that was, you know, true to his convictions and stayed with the project. I think Ridley Scott's direction of this film is great. I don't have any problem with the gore in this film. This film is very gory. There's several very gory scenes, whereas everything in Silence of the Lambs was implied. I mean, you see some pretty good gore in this film, but again, we're talking about a cannibal character. We're talking about somebody that eats people. So I don't understand why people have a problem with the gore in this film, given the fact that the main anti-hero is a cannibal. I don't know. I never had understood that. Also, the way that Mason Verger looks, I think, freaked a lot of people out, because he is a man that Hannibal made disfigure himself. So the character Gary Oldman plays is, you cannot tell that it's Gary Oldman. He looks, if anybody's seen the movie Sleepwalkers, he looks like one of those cat creatures from Sleepwalkers. I think that's the best way to describe how he looks. But I think that performance as well, behind all of that makeup, Gary Oldman still gives a tremendous performance. And there's not one time that you look at that and go, that's Gary Oldman. He is completely hidden behind this makeup. That is a man that just gets into his characters. And him and Hopkins just steal this movie for me. At its essence, though, Hannibal is a love story in many ways. I think that, and it's something that Ridley Scott even mentioned, that he wasn't trying to make a sequel to Silence of the Lambs. He was trying to make a sequel in sense to those characters. Where are those characters now in their lives after the events of Silence of the Lambs? And Hannibal did come to love Clarice. I mean, that you see that in the scene in the jail at the end, the last scene where they actually see each other, when he hands her the files back and he slowly just gently grazes her finger as she takes the files from him. He grew to love her, and even though he's a sick, twisted person, I think at its essence, that's what Hannibal is. And as the movie progresses, that's where you see that he does care for her, that he does love her. And I think that that's what makes Hannibal so different from Silence of the Lambs. And I'm glad it's not a complete, you know, direct, like in terms of look and feel, it's not at all like Silence of the Lambs. It's its own entity. And I don't know why people have such a problem with the film. So my rating for Hannibal is the same as Silence of the Lambs, 10 out of 10 for me. I love Hannibal, and like I said again, I don't know why people have such a problem with it. I think it's just a tremendous film. I loved it the first time I saw it in the theater, and I've loved it ever since. And you know, it came out over 12 years ago, and I still think it holds up well. And I love the Italian locations. I love Hans Zimmer's score. I love the way that Ridley Scott gave it this almost just this romantic kind of vibe to it, but you know, just in terms of the colors, whereas Silence of the Lambs was very gray, this has a lot of colors in it, lots of reds, especially when he's in Florence, Italy. I think that's the strongest part of the film. I love those scenes. So yeah, I love the movie Hannibal.